So we ended last time with Jefferson winning in the presidential election of 1800, the Revolution of 1800, Jefferson called it. So let's talk about America under Jefferson. Jefferson had a vision of a country of independent farmers. They were called yeoman farmers, was the term at the time, who would educate themselves and hopefully make wise choices in choosing leaders. And this kind of middle class, you might call it, although nobody would have called it that back then, would be the backbone of the country. And he believed it would be a republic of virtue, these wise, educated, independent farmers. It doesn't work out that way, of course. Technology is going to come along and dramatically change farming and manufacturing and how we make a living in general. And the world essentially evolves away from Jefferson's dream, but that was his vision. Educated citizens are essential to this idea of a wise republic. I mean, how are you going to make good choices about who to vote for, what policies to support, if you're not educated? The Democratic Republicans, that was Jefferson's party, just to make it confusing for students later, dreamed of a nationwide system of free public schools, for white males anyway. But this wasn't going to happen. The country was not ready to embrace this. The states weren't ready to fund this, and the federal government at the time didn't have the power to do it. And so education remains pretty exclusively private and for the richest people in America. In the South and the middle colonies, education is largely religious. That is to say, it's done through churches. The Northeast does have some non-religious or secular schools, Andover and Exeter are two of the first of these, for example. Schools tend to have an aristocratic worldview. They cater to the rich, and they kind of teach about the world from the point of view of the wealthy. There's very few schools for the poor, and those that do exist are of inferior quality. Women are not educated. There does develop this idea of the Republican mother. And the Republican mother is a housewife who has to know enough to help her male children. And since virtually all women had lots of kids and several were male, there did develop this idea that women should have some degree of education, but really just enough to maybe help somebody in elementary school do their homework. In 1789, Massachusetts goes so far as to make a rule saying that women have to be admitted to public schools, and some other states actually follow this. But a woman's education is strictly for her to help the male children in the house. There's also a movement to educate the Native Americans, and when I say educate, I mean teach them how to be white, and to proselytize them, to turn them into Christians. These are small and meet with varying effect, but there's no attempt at all to educate blacks. There are 9 universities in America in 1776 and 22 in 1800, so we do see a rapid period of expansion of universities. None of them are funded with government money. They are all private. And only 1 in 1,000 white men go to any college at all. So colleges are exclusively for the wealthy, and even there it's fairly elite, fairly rare for somebody to attend, or even more rare for somebody to graduate from a college. The first medical school in America is Penn, or the University of Pennsylvania. American doctors try to start using science in medicine, but the public actually rejects this. The public is very used to their old kind of household remedies. Medical schools also use cadavers to learn. You know, they cut up dead bodies, as you know. And this upsets a lot of people. That was a fairly new idea, and it was very disturbing for many people. The movement for sanitation also encounters a lot of resistance. The idea that we have to disinfect things is new, and people don't understand germs. And so while there are doctors who are arguing for it, they don't understand why it's necessary. They've just noticed that dirty instruments tend to lead to infection. But that movement's pretty much rejected at this time. Doctors are often more dangerous than the disease that you have. For example, you may go to the doctor for a relatively minor problem like a cold, and the doctor may decide you need to get bled, and the bleeding could kill you, or it could lead to an infection that could kill you. Some people believe, this is disputed, that George Washington ultimately died from being bled for a more minor illness. Doctors also begin to take over childbirth, which has always been the job of midwives before. But the poor can't afford doctors. And so what ends up happening is midwives get driven out of business, is that people begin to consider this a job for an educated person. And the poor people can't afford the doctors, and so we actually begin to see a severe decrease in the amount of medical care available for the poor, for regular people. Education at the time was based around the idea of nationalism. The first history books in America, and the first really important history book in America, is written by the guy on the right here. That's Washington Irving, who also wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and the Rip Van Winkle story. And his original textbook was essentially propaganda. There were lots of stories about how awesome and wonderful George Washington was. This is where a lot of the Columbus mythology comes from, which of course is not true. And the idea of the book was to make children proud to be an American and really buy into the American ideals and the American system more than it was to present kind of a well-studied, reasoned, factual approach to history. Another part of this nationalistic movement is Noah Webster's American Dictionary. Now, of course, America had developed its distinct dialect, and Americans didn't speak exactly like the British did anymore. And so Noah Webster wanted to capture the way Americans used words, and he's going to create this dictionary which features American slang and new spellings that Americans have adopted. And oftentimes when you see an English word spelled different in England than it is here in America, it goes back to this Webster's Dictionary and this whole idea that we had a slightly different language. And this is all nationalism. This is all a way of kind of puffing out America's chest and claiming independence and claiming to be something new and different from the old world. Alright, be cool, don't freak out, not remember the Illuminati, and that's not what this symbol actually meant originally. The 1790s were a low point for organized religion in the United States. Ideas of liberty and a rejection of the British system weakened the church's power because the church was seen as an authority, and this was kind of an anti-authority period. And of course, the Anglican Church was the official church of England. And when we left England, many people left or lost interest in the Anglican Church. And what we go through here is a period of what we call rational religions. And these are attempts to reconcile kind of traditional Christianity with science. The chief among these are deism, universalism, and Unitarianism. Universalism and Unitarianism both kind of reject the specifics, kind of the details of the Bible, and more embrace the message or the morals and the ideals of the Bible. Deism is something different altogether. Deism is kind of a scientific approach to religion. Now, they do believe there is a God, but they believe that he kind of created the world as a giant machine, set it in motion, and then the world follows natural laws. It is not God is not monitoring it and changing things as we go along. They also believe that Jesus Christ was not the Son of God. Jefferson was a deist. And Jefferson famously had a Jefferson's Bible, he called it, which was the Bible with all the miracles torn out. He literally just ripped the pages out. And he left only the things that could be proved through science. Deism, Universalism, and Unitarianism all reject predestination, by the way, which is actually becoming a more and more common viewpoint. Now, the 1790s were a low-point religion, but religion is going to make a comeback beginning in the early 1800s. The Second Great Awakening, we've talked about the First Great Awakening. The Second Great Awakening is going to come about in the first part of the 19th century here. In the West, this is going to be Presbyterians, which is a Scottish religion that's primarily found in Scotland, but of course a lot of Scottish come over here and move out to the West. Methodists will send traveling preachers to travel through from town to town and spread the word of Methodism. Baptists do very well in the South, and the camp revival is the primary tool here. This is where you go to an area and you have a big meeting in a tent, or as you can see here, they set up a temporary stage and they invite people from all around. And they could draw tens of thousands of people to these things. They could just be enormous. They rejected the Enlightenment. They rejected the turn to science. And these people were calling for people to embrace Jesus, reject the rationality of the Enlightenment movement. They called for an active piety, not a passive religion like, oh, I go to church on Sunday, but that's about it. They believe people should be involved in religious activity every day. And a lot of these churches that will have events every night or multiple nights throughout the week, that actually goes back to the Second Great Awakening. They believe that you should be engaged actively in charity and charitable organizations as a way of showing your belief in God. They also reject predestination, and they replace it by ideas about works and faith. Now, what I mean by that is you have to accept Jesus as your personal Savior, according to the Second Great Awakening preachers. And you had to do good works to get in, to find salvation. This largely appealed to women, who, of course, found themselves powerless in society and were really attracted to this message that by being charitable and giving, they could find salvation. And it launched a lot of charity organizations. And in fact, we're going to look at the coming decades. A lot of the social change in society is going to come out of the Second Great Awakening and these ideals of doing good works on a daily basis. Their initial targets are the orphans and the poor, and they're going to benefit from this greatly as people see an easy way to do good works and be a good person is to help out orphans and the poor. Some revivals are open to blacks. And there's actually large groups of black preachers who come out of this movement who become community leaders. And black preachers will continue to be community leaders in many cases right up to the present day. Presbyterians and Baptists convert Southern Native Americans. A Native American named Handsome Lake, who was struggling with alcoholism, will give up drinking, embrace Christianity, claim that that's what gave him the power to give up drinking, and will go around traveling to around the Native Americans and urging them to give up the white man's vices like drinking, and return to their Native American lifestyle, but with Christianity as Christians. And so that's kind of an interesting element of this whole movement.